Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We've just started recording. That's fantastic. So just a word of welcome to today's webinar, co-sponsored by Sage Circle and the Association for Analyst Relations Partnership. I'm Duncan Chapple. I'm joined here by Carter Lusher. And today we're going to be talking about analyst acquisitions and the implication for analyst relations. Obviously, the impetus for the call has been Informa Tech's reverse takeover of TechTarget. And now the new TechTarget gives Informa a listing on the Nasdaq, but also a shift towards a very different business model. Just a few points of housekeeping. It's a webinar. There's a Q&A feature at the top of the panel. I would love it if you could use the Q&A panel for any questions that you would like to submit to us. We've had quite a lot of questions submitted in advance, which is fantastic. So some of those we've pulled out onto some charts that we have later on. We'll be recording today's conversation as well, so you don't necessarily need to write everything down. And if you email Carter or myself, our email addresses are there, then we'll give you a PDF of the slides a little while, and then the slides, yeah, we'll put them somewhere as well. I'm just going to introduce us and give a little bit more context so that you can have a little bit more context on who we are and why we are doing this conversation today.
Let's go ahead and turn to slide number 2, Duncan.
Yep.
Looks like it's a little slow moving there. Anyway, while the system catch up, okay. Slide number 2 is an overview of my career, just to let you know where I'm coming from. Basically, I've been in the analyst game for a third of a century, both as an IT manager who was a client to Gartner, a Gartner analyst, an analyst at Gartner at Sage Circle and KCG, back to being an analyst at Ovum, and then various AR positions around the industry. So again, been in the analyst game a long time. The one thing I will note, however, is that I am between jobs right now. And so if you happen to hear of any interesting opportunities, please let me know. Let's move over to slide number 3 and have Duncan introduce himself. And by the way, I'm still seeing the title slide.
Interesting. That is really interesting. I don't know why that's happening. If you can see slide 3, can you press like a happy reaction? Okay, Todd says the slide looks good to him. Okay, that's nice. That is nice. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
And Wendy can see the slide as well. Yeah, luckily Carter wrote the slides, so he doesn't really need to see them. He's probably got them on the second screen as well. So just to introduce myself. I think a lot of people on the webinar know Carter and I, but my background, my deep background in these kind of black boxes is I used to work as a database administrator and then was an expert in machine learning and data mining, and that got me into being an analyst myself at Ovum during the heady days of the .com boom and bust. And from there, I was very lucky to have a series of roles running analyst relations programs and leading analyst relations teams in PR agencies. I learned a massive amount in a very short period of time at Deloitte, at Omnicom, PR's Broader unit, and at Octopus Group. And then for a lot of the last 20 years, I've been consulting 2 analyst relations teams, running evaluation programs and developing strategies that help analyst relations teams that are often performing kind of well to just align better to their goals. In the last 10 years, I have these 3 threads which are really running parallel in some ways. I'm one of the founders and co-director of the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh. Up until yesterday, I was head of analyst relations at CC Group, which is the lead agency for B2B tech in Global Com, which is one of these big groups of public relations agencies. And so there I've been leading dozens of analyst relations programs supported by at various times a dozen fantastic colleagues who've been trained in running analyst relations. And then now I'm working on two things at the moment. One is Sage Circle, which is a CC Group client that the company's allowing me to move forward to, and then also Signica, a Norwegian fintech and digital identity provider. I'm working for some time as their insights manager. On a fractional basis, and I'll be continuing to do that for the next few months. The connection to Sage Circle is fortuitous, and because they are sponsor of this, we have a word from our sponsors. I've got a couple of slides to share with you. Obviously, as Carter has said, you know, he was one of the founders of Sage Circle, and one of the things that I've been impressed with during the years that I've been working with Sage Circle as a client, and also before I've known their reputation, is the emphasis that they have on understanding that analyst relations is about not just shifting analyst perception, but about arming sales and extracting insights from analysts. And that's something that Carter, Dave Ecker, Chris German, that they've really laid a very strong foundation there. And I've been working particularly closely with Ephraim Malik and Ian Scott, Sarah Shamulian over the last few years in the Analyst Attitude Survey. Just to update you on what Sage Circle does and how it's going to be growing its offer over the next few months. Obviously, you know, let me or anyone else at Sage Circle know if you'd like to know more about any of these. There is the Analyst Advocacy Study. This is this 24-year-old study now where we're combining an online survey of a massive globally representative sample of analysts with spoken word audits, qualitative interviewing, where we're talking to people about what they would do in certain situations. That's a big part of the meat of the business, has been a big part of the meat of the business since certainly since 2020 when I got back in touch with them. And the Sage Score diagnostic, this is an ancient Sage Circle tool that has now been turned into an online self-service tool that you can use. Other things that we'll be rolling out over the next few months at Sage Circle are a program to coach analyst relations programs and the leaders of those programs, a suite of live and recorded training, and of course we're co-sponsors of the Analyst Relations Forum along with the Association for Analyst Relations Partnership, which is co-sponsoring this event. That will be held at the University of Edinburgh Business School on June the 27th. So, you know, please put that date in your diary. Unsurprisingly, it will be a hybrid event. Not everybody can come to Edinburgh, unfortunately, but the face-to-face experience there will be exceptional. Then there are some other things which are being worked on and which are being tested in proof of concept projects at the moment. A critical briefing accelerator is something that I think we can find a better name for, but that's basically an opportunity to work with a Sage Circle advisor when you have an important briefing coming up, for example, around a signature piece of evaluation, where we're helping you develop the deck, work with the spokespeople, and having a real rehearsal where a former analyst is coming in and treating you like you're in front of an analyst. Membership programs are something that Sage Circle has had successfully at various times, and we're relaunching these later this year. And then also we're doing competitive scorecards. This analyst advocacy study and the spoken word audits that we do give us a huge amount of insight into our clients, but also an awful lot of insight into organizations that are not our clients. And what we can see is that there must be at least 50 other firms where we've already got a large amount of information, large enough to give confident information about how they compare to their competitors in the eyes of analysts. And that's something that my colleague Ian Scott is working on.
Okay, let's go ahead and move to slide number 6 and look at the agenda today, which are also the key takeaways. The first key takeaway is that while an atypical type of deal, the Informa Tech's investment is actually just, a very solid part of Informa's and Informa Tech's strategy, and I'll be addressing that. The second key takeaway is around the deal for TechTarget, and frankly, the fact that it's just one of many acquisitions that have happened over the last 50 years when it comes to the analyst community. Then we'll switch over to Duncan discussing the opportunities for TechTarget, and number 4, about the opportunity, or it's a sign actually, that AR transformation must be enabled. So again, these are the key takeaways, but also the agenda. And if we turn to slide number 7, we'll look at the first one, which is about the nature of the deal. Now, I'm going to go through these slides really fast because just setting a little context, what we really want to do is engage in the discussion and the conversation. And oh, by the way, Duncan and I don't agree on everything, which will make the discussion fun, and we'll be obviously looking for your comments and observations in the Q&A box. Remember, Q&A, not chat. So let's turn to slide number 8. And I think one of the reasons why this particular deal sort of confused a lot of members of the AR community, especially some folks that were thinking, oh, wow, Informa Tech is just offloading Omdia, and it's that everything's going out of business and it's all chaos. No. The reality is this sort of a deal is very typical. In fact, NASDAQ has a very specific rule about what they call a controlled company. And obviously, within the context of this particular acquisition, you look at the rule from NASDAQ, a controlled company is a company of which more than 50% of the voting power, ... Now, if you look at the Informa press release around the deal, which, by the way, won't close until the second half of this year, they've got a 57% ownership position. So, okay, well, they're starting to meet that sort of the definition from NASDAQ. If we turn to slide number 9, it becomes crystal clear that the new TechTarget, and I got those in quotation marks because I can't imagine that new TechTarget is going to be the final brand, but what do I know? I'm not a branding expert. It is firmly controlled by Informa Tech, as defined by the NASDAQ definition of a controlled company. And you start seeing this throughout the investor materials that were released around the announcement of the acquisition, or the reverse acquisition, or whatever you want to call it. You look at the tech on the far left-hand side, you see that the TechTarget logo has been modified to be explicitly an Informa Group company. So right there, they're already saying, hey, this is part of Informa Group. Yeah, it's the new TechTarget, but the reality is that it's part of the bigger Informa Group. As to, who controls the board of directors, again, if you look at what was in the investor materials, you see that Gary Nugent's on the board. You've got 3 representatives from Informa, including Stephen Carter, the Informa CEO. And you have a person who's a non-executive director of Informa moving over to this board as well. And then if you look at the leadership slide, yes, all the faces are the existing TechTarget executives, but there are 2 new faces on this particular slide, Gary Nugent and Bill Morelli. Hi, Bill. I see you're on the event. And these are folks that are obviously at the top of the pyramid in terms of leadership, and they are Informa Tech folks. Let's go to the next slide, slide number 10. And again, what's the motivation for the deal? Well, frankly, Informa is a serial acquirer of many types of organizations to build their overall portfolio of products. Now, frankly, the analyst firm Omdia, and correct me if I'm wrong, is part of this specialist business content. And so as a consequence, you think about this as, oh, the analyst part of this new organization, which we as analyst relations professionals are, really focused on to the point of being obsessed about, is that it's only a small part of the overall Informa. So let's not go overboard thinking about, how big of a deal, Omdia, Canalys, and the new ESG member of the team is going to be. And let's go to the next slide. So frankly, all due kudos to ESG and the research they've done over the decades, and Omdia and all the great work that's been done bringing together that particular brand and that particular group of very smart analysts. This wasn't about ESG and Omdia. It's about all the other aspects of the Informa and the Informa Tech business, the events, the media properties, the digital content, etc. And frankly, ESG is tiny when you compare it to Omdia. As you can see it's just a tiny fraction the number of analysts. And ESG's role at TechTarget was primarily to create research, again, to feed the overall business of TechTarget, which was the media sites and the content creation services. Important for that, and remember they were acquired in 2021. So what are the opportunities for Omdia from my point of view? Well, first and foremost, you get some good, smart people, both on the analyst side and on the sales side. So they can be, additive to what's already there and start contributing almost immediately to the new to the new TechTarget business. In addition, they've got years and years of intellectual property in the form of published research, etc., that can go right into the library, which will make Omdia's library of research more attractive to the buyers of this particular research. And then last but not least, we got to talk about the shiny object in the room, artificial intelligence, generative AI, machine learning, etc. This becomes more training content to feed into the training set to be used for all the innovative new ideas that are going to be coming out of new TechTarget, Omdia, etc. Okay, so that was a quick flyover of what I'm looking at from the TechTarget point of view. Let's go to slide number 12. And this was my very specific analysis that I published on LinkedIn about the acquisition. Now, this was done back on January 12th. And, with more information and everything, it's something I would probably modify a little bit. But frankly, this is still, pretty accurate from my point of view. Great, we're getting some questions coming in. Thanks for that. I will address those a little bit later. And so let's just go ahead and move on to the next key issue. Now, this key issue is looking at the trend of acquisitions. And frankly, let's go to the next slide. This isn't a new trend. This has been going on forever in the marketplace. When I was at Gartner in the 90s, Gartner did 65 acquisitions. It was mind-boggling how difficult that was to manage. Just to give you some examples, starting back in January of 2021, and I picked January of 2021 as sort of the starting point to provide these examples, merely because that's when TechTarget acquired ESG, which of course is part of the deal in this current situation. But then IDC made acquisitions, Gartner made acquisitions, Blackstone acquired IDG, which is the parent of IDC, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this is just, a continuation of what's been happening and has always happened. Let's go to the next slide. And so my strategic planning assumption from last summer's IT industry analyst 5-year scenario, 2028, is that, the time is right for acquisitions. And if you look at it from the point of view of why, there's a lot of companies with a lot of financial strength. Number two is that the valuations right now are cheap. And why are they cheap? Well, frankly, a lot of the analyst firms that are, focus of a lot of acquisitions sell primarily to the vendor community. The vendor community, in good times, spend like drunken sailors. During tight times, like the current economic situation, they slam their checkbooks closed, which means that a lot of firms, the sales have slowed down. And I've heard this from many, many firms and many, many analysts. And this is not a reflection of them. It's just the nature of their target market and their particular strategy. So there'll continue to be lots more acquisitions. I've had this through 2026, but frankly, now through the end of time, and that'll be an interesting thing to watch. Well, let's go on to the next part and have turn it over to Duncan for the first of his two key takeaways.
Thank you very much. So the first part of what I'm talking about is the opportunity, and then I'm going to go on to some obstacles that I think the analyst relations community has to deal with. But primarily what I would start off by saying is that the opportunities are huge for TechTarget, and by that, of course, I mean new TechTarget, the merger of Informa Tech and TechTarget. One thing that both of these organizations have, and if you think about them, they are rather similar in size, even if the analyst operations are of completely different scale. The two businesses are really not so different. Both of them have got quite a lot of experience in integrating research, media, and events in order to extract insights, and in particular insights that can power marketing, aid customer acquisition, accelerate the sales pipeline, increase discovery about the topics that are of interest to clients. And I think both in Informa and in TechTarget, there are already very deep examples of how that is working. Easier tools, standardization, process optimization, obviously all the the real estate and the overheads are simplified. You look at Black Hat, the way that Omdia and Black Hat have been able to work together with a wide range of other Informa Tech brands in order to push ahead in cybersecurity. Very similar developments happening around automotive, for example, with Ward's Intelligence and Omdia and other Informa Tech brands pushing forward a story about the digitization of the automotive experience. We're seeing a growing editorial team in Informa that's more plugged into those 350 analysts. Informa now has bi-weekly synergy calls where in specific topic areas, people on the content side of the business and people in the research businesses like Omdia are able to connect, exchange experiences on what is changing inside the market. And part of that opportunity is made real because these organizations are going to be pretty careful to preserve the value in the analyst brands. And even if you compare the way that Omdia and ESG exist, also the way that Ward's Intelligence, the automotive tech commentator, is still separate from Omdia years later, you can see that there's a lot of attention in preserving independence, making sure that client interactions and client experience come first, but still trying to develop a collaboration culture. And I think that means that we'll see that as new TechTarget tries to find better business models to generate vendor revenues from all of this content, we'll probably see Omdia analysts ring-fenced a little bit, not exactly put into the same experience, for example, that ESG analysts have when they have to partner with vendors to help develop thought leader collateral. To move on to my next slide, he said, struggling with his mouse. Excellent. Having said that, there is a danger that AR can get disoriented about this, and frankly, I think the big danger is, we're looking at this merger by trying to understand what happens to the analyst firms and what happens to analyst influence. That's completely natural if we're analyst relations people, right? It'd be weird if we didn't do that. But as Carter has said, the analysts are a very small part of this. The merger and acquisition here, it's not a tactical thing about whether ESG is valuable or whether Omdia has got an ESG sized hole inside it. It's that M&A is the dominant growth strategy in almost every market, not just in this one. So thinking that this reallocation of the Informa Tech resources and leadership into new TechTarget is offloading. Offloading is selling something you don't want to have. Maybe even selling something that you think is worthless to some idiot who's prepared to buy it from you. That's not what's going on here. Yeah, they paid $350 million to buy and control the new TechTarget, and I think it's very important to remember that this is a European brand that is now acquiring a Nasdaq listing, and that massively aids its transparency, its access to American investors, not just its ability to borrow, but US investors love properties that have dual listings, and they love to invest in their own country. It also produces, I think we will see, some opportunities for some very quick advantages to expand the reach and the influence of Informa Tech analysts, which of course means TechTarget can make money out of what the Informa Tech targets are saying and doing and writing. So you can grow the audience and grow the asset that can be leveraged and sold with very little investment. And of course, analyst firms are highly synergistic to the content and the data offer. Yeah? And the more that you can own a market and focus on the market, the better. I talk about this a little bit later on, but in a way, Carter has touched on it when he talked about the way that Informa has divested and invested. It pushed some assets over to IHS and then pulled in some assets in exchange to strengthen Informa Tech. So it's all about aligning more closely to markets, going deeper and stronger, and building share of pocket in particular markets. And that aligns with the way that tech vendors are pivoting their spending towards customer success, understanding customer success, providing content and gathering intelligence about customers at different stages of their acquisition and use. And of course, cross-sell and upsell to the vendor pool, which is definitely going to be the Informa Tech and TechTarget approach. They're going to win eyeballs in the enterprise because the vendors are paying them to do it. Yeah, they're not going to try to compete for the enterprise IT budget for subscriptions. That's a loser's game to try to go head to head with Gartner for that. But they can get as many eyeballs, more eyeballs through a content play. Let me move on to the second point that I want to make in the conversation, which is that it's a sign of the times. Yeah, it's definitely a sign of the times for the analyst firms, but it's also a sign of the times for analyst relations, and it creates some new opportunities for analyst relations. And I think a nice way to frame this is what Gartner talks about, the inbound and the outbound, or what Kevin Lucas and his colleagues at Forrester talk about, the learn side and the earn side. And I think having balance between these is very important. People will remember that I'm involved in the Analyst Observatory at the University of Edinburgh, where we've been looking for nearly 10 years now at the evolution of the analyst industry. And when we started, one of the things we spoke about was isomorphism, which is basically the idea that different things in a field start to look more and more like each other. Like coffee shops. Coffee shops will look more and more like each other as time goes by. And I think that what we'll see is this trend where all the small analyst firms try to position themselves like Gartner. They mimic the offer, they mimic the structure, mimic the deliverables, mimic the events, mimic the sales force. That's less attainable and less viable than ever before. And it's less viable than building a mini Informa. You know, that if you were to pick one small market space and to say, right, I want to try to own that market space with events, with analysts, with intelligence, you think of what Informa Tech has been able to do in the cybersecurity space with Black Hat and this massive expansion in the Informa Tech cybersecurity practice under Maxine Holt. That's an amazing example of what relatively small resources can do when they are focused on one particular market space. Only Gartner has that scale to sell into the largest enterprise. No firm can do that, not even Gartner can do that in the mid-market or the SMB sector. And that's where analyst firms can increase the exposure of their analysts, their brand awareness. They can grow an audience. And that's part of a long-term trend. I think we'll see more convergence between analyst firms with advertorial, sponsored content, data-driven services, basically the exploring every route for the digitization of this content. I don't think that means that all these analyst brands are suddenly going to die. You can see, for example, the way that Black Hat and heavy reading is still around, all this time later. If you've got content brands that are aligned to audiences, I think these brands can survive. They've got legitimacy, they've got significance. I think there's more and more value in focusing on the buyer market and trying to own that market rather than building out your coverage very broadly. So then I think that produces possibilities for analyst relations transformation. And I think that means thinking more extensively about both the inbound side and the outbound side. If, at the risk of caricaturing Gartner, Gartner's guidance for analyst relations people is listen to our analysts, do what they say, and then tell those analysts that you are doing what they say. So the inbound is very much like one way, right? Gartner is not saying, please come along and shift our perceptions. But in a certain degree, you have to be able to shift analyst perceptions in order to do the job of AR. And that's particularly the case that this shift towards more of a content model where analyst content is creating and accelerating and developing intelligence about what is happening in the sales pipeline and the customer experience. This requires content to intervene in it. And that doesn't only have to be Gartner content, it can be content from anywhere. I've had a lot of learning recently where I've been working with some of the firms that Sage Circle works with. And I've come across, for example, AR teams that have boosted their budgets fivefold or more by acquiring the budget for analyst content and data services. And that's something that I would have been very cautious about. But what I see is they are able to take the content that they've generated and amplify it beyond its organic audience. And then through leveraging these commercial relationships, they're able to develop more relationships inside their own organizations. They're able to interpose themselves, say, between Informa Tech and the marketing team, rather than the marketing team directly commissioning content from Informa Tech. This gives them more knowledge both ways. The analysts learn more about the client learns more about the analysts, but the big difference is that the analyst relations team learns more about their colleagues, about the content that is driving engagement from the clients, and that brings home the bacon for the sales and marketing team. So somebody asked about, whether there's going to be a challenge for Gartner, and Gartner's business model, that can't be challenged, right? But Gartner can be competed with for eyeballs. Yeah? Already, Gartner's freemium content gets more attraction than its paid content. And the research that my former colleagues at CC Group have done, you might know they do these very extensive catalyst reports into specific tech markets where they commission independent research into buyer behavior. Buyers are using many, many more analyst firms than they used to. They are not amateurish in the way that they do that. They're involving vendors later and later in the sales pipeline. So that value and influence generated by analyst content is absolutely nothing to do with how much enterprise IT is spending on analyst subscriptions. And we've been, I think, quite disoriented as a community in places by focusing on who's the CIO spending money with rather than who are they reading. I think that these examples that I've seen show the opportunity for AR to grow its value by leading that engagement with the analyst firms and with analyst content. And it means that also AR firms, AR teams have to become account managers in a way to understand the fragmented stakeholders in their own organizations who can benefit from analyst content. I think now we pull together these themes. These 4 themes here. Obviously, we have questions for discussion ahead of us, but I wonder, this seems like a good stage to just pause and see, do you have any thoughts about, now you've seen this discussion pull together, do you have any further thoughts before we go into the discussion? And you're on mute. Yeah, I do it too.
Let's go ahead and go to the discussion, because I think we'll be tying some of the themes together in the discussion. So if you go to slide number 24.
Yeah.
And I've been sort of copying and from the chat and from the Q&A in the next few slides. So the first question that I want to focus on is the second bullet point from Sarita, is about the consolidation of media analysts and event firms. And we've seen this with IDC and now TechTarget and Informa. Do you think we'll see more of this in the future? If so, good thing or not? And I quickly put together a little slide to answer this. So if you go to slide number 25, is that the answer is yes. I think we will see additional firms like this. However, in this particular case, it's not IDC, the data analysts that we are so familiar working with, but it's more IDG, the International Data Group, which is the parent of IDC, but also the parent of Foundry, formerly IDC Communications. If you look at Foundry and if you look at the new TechTarget, they have very similar business models and offerings to the marketplace. So in terms of buyer intent data, in terms of media that vendors or companies, not just technology vendors, but companies can use and leverage, content marketing services, et cetera, et cetera. So Foundry is very similar to TechTarget with one exception. Foundry and IDG and IDC are focused on information technology, especially information technology for the enterprise, for businesses and for corporations. If you look at TechTarget, before and after connecting with Informa Tech, so you got going forward, you'll have Informa Markets and Informa Connect. They are just incredibly broad in terms of the markets they go after, of which technology is only one small part of that. So for instance, Informa Markets go after healthcare and pharmaceuticals with their events like HIMSS, or infrastructure and construction like World of Concrete. I did not know that there was a World of Concrete B2B market focus for a company like the new TechTarget and such. So yes, there are, expanding things like the Foundry of IDG, and then there's, new TechTarget. But there are other firms that have the potential to go after this sort of a business model in terms of information, media, data, and et cetera. One that immediately comes to mind is Bloomberg. Bloomberg, yes, is all about the Bloomberg terminals for financial data and for Wall Street and the investor community and the city and London, et cetera. But the reality is that it's a massive content creation, data creation organization. So yeah, they could jump into the same sort of environment as Foundry and new TechTarget. You've got the economists with the economist intelligence division, and they're starting to do events and such like that as well. So yes, so there's low barriers to entry, which means that there could be some additional consolidation outside of the strictly IT focused organization. So again, great question from Sarita. And from my point of view, yes. Is it a good thing? It depends on who it's a good thing for. Is it a good thing for companies to have more resources to help with their marketing, with their visibility, with their branding? Yes. Is it a good thing for the technology vendors specifically, not the broader set of industries, but for the technology vendors and the analyst relations? It's kind of a wash for analyst relations because we're still focused on the analysts who either directly or indirectly influence deals. For the technology vendors, it's like, well, just more resources for them. Hey, if I can get more buyer intent data to help drive sales and marketing, that's only a good thing. Duncan, any additional observations?
No, I completely agree with you. I do think the comparison with IDC is powerful, not just for like this iteration of IDC, but also if we think back to, what the synergies were like between IDC and IDG in the good old days. That there were that there were such profound amplification opportunities for IDC through other media. But now what we see is this is not just going to be media, but through a whole series of other channels. And I just want to link that quickly to one of the questions in the chat, which is, if Omdia is mostly focused on vendor, then what is their differentiated value? Well, part of that differentiated value is the fact that they have that amplifier. They have that incredibly powerful amplification through Informa Tech and TechTargets, data services, events, training opportunities, the media titles. It's massive amplification, which I think it's hard to say that Forrester has that, to be honest. And to think about the way that money is moving. Well, I mean, okay, you can see that Forrester is shrinking, right? So you know that Informa Tech is growing like 40% a year, 50% a year. Forrester is shrinking. So like that's the way the money is moving, and I think that is the differentiation that Omdia is effectively a synergy play, yeah. And these standalone analyst firms have got they're going to have some challenging times ahead.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and go to the Q&A because there's lots of good questions coming in. And I'll read the next one, Duncan.
Thank you.
And this is from Paula Schmidt. To Duncan's point, too much focus on who the CIO is spending money with rather than who they are reading. Would you agree that this is even more relevant outside of the USA, because there are more SMBs, parenthetically in EMEA, for example?
I mean, I think the big danger is no. I think the big difference is between the past and the present. I think when I was like back in the 90s, right? Tech purchasing was like that. Tech purchasing was done by the CIO, right? And honestly, it hasn't been like that for a long time, right? A third of tech, even 10 years ago, it wasn't like that, right? A third of tech purchasing is done by the CEO, but by the CIO, say. Another third is, the CIO is told what to do by line of business managers, and then another third of it is the IT team finds out that somebody has bought something, and suddenly they have to support it. IT purchasing is completely different in organizations. And then also look at what happened to buying centers during the pandemic. Yeah, buying centers became fragmented. People weren't meeting in the office to talk about things. They weren't like soaking in common sense from the IT teams. Vendors often had strong relationships with the IT teams, but vendors are getting involved in sales deals later and later on. The volume of analyst research used, it has exploded over the last 15, 20 years. Yeah, more people are in buying centers than used to be the case. They're in wider parts of the business. They're using more analysts, and they're using analysts more deeply through the sales cycle. And it's not only analysts they're using lots and lots of different kinds of content. Analyst content is definitely part of that like handful of most important forms of content in most markets. But it's much, much more important than who is the CIO spending money on it, and equating influence with who enterprise IT spends its budget on. This is an absolute 20th century model of IT purchasing that wasn't true even 10 or 15 years ago.
Okay, no disagreement there. So there's a couple of questions that I can sort of combine. One is from Joel Wixell. So this is really different than Gartner, right? Something new and different. And then Stephen England had a similar one around the fact that it's, these firms are focused more on the vendor community than on the end user. So combining these two sorts of these two questions, the answer is yes. As I mentioned before, one of the reasons why the valuations are very attractive for acquisitions is that many analyst firms are focused on the vendor community, not on the end users. End users consistently spend in good times and bad. Vendors spend less during rough economic times or economic slowdowns. And so this organization, the new TechTarget, along with IDC, Foundry, are really focused on supporting not the acquisition of technologies, the purchase of technologies by businesses or corporations or enterprises, but really about how do we provide support for companies in terms of their marketing content, their need for buyer intent data, et cetera. So yes, this is very different from Gartner. Gartner is still, very focused on technology, at least on the Gartner technology sales side, the legacy Gartner that focused on CIO, whereas the CEB side, or the Gartner business sales part of it, is focused on, things like HR, legal, best practices, et cetera. So yes, very different from Gartner, but you will see more and more along the lines of IDG and TechTarget, competing more and more for those dollars and for those eyeballs. Okay, let's look at another one of these questions from Rob Carroll. Where do you see the future of industry? Easy for me to say. Where do you see the future of industry-specific tech analyst research, and will there be major players or remaining niche? Parenthetically, for example, manufacturing tech, healthcare tech, et cetera. You want to address this real quick, and I'll throw in some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've touched on that already. I think this is a viable strategy. I think if there are multiple business models that are viable for analyst firms. I'm not saying that Informa Tech's model is the only one and that everybody has to follow it. But if you follow that, then you want to align to buyer audiences. You want to get as deep as possible into a market, and to be able to collect information and offer intelligence, offer content that people can interact with, so that you can, get a better understanding of what they're doing. You're putting the content out like radar, and you're listening to what you hear back. Obviously, it's easier to do that in a smaller market, in a niche, than in a large market. And if we think of the way that analyst value is increasingly provided through freemium and paid for ways rather than through subscriptions, that also means your content has to stand out more. And that's another reason to encourage more specialization. But the last part of it is everything about M&A. Yeah, that if you speak to a small analyst firms, okay, there are these lifestyle firms, right? But if you're running a mid-sized analyst firm, you're hungry, you want to grow that firm, your game plan is M&A. Your game plan is to be acquired or to acquire other firms until you get big enough for somebody even bigger to acquire you. And you do that by not buying redundancy, but by buying something that is additive. And again, that's a very strong reason for building expertise in any market that you can build up a strong ownership and knowledge of. That'd be my take.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Now, if you look at, like Duncan mentioned, the so-called lifestyle firms, which in part sort of touches on Tamaria's question about a lot of the great analysts have left the big players and gone to start their own things. And the challenge that they have is they don't have the marketing and the sales capabilities. And so they can make a good living for themselves. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a lot of influence or be able to create a lot of great content, though some of the new AI tools might be able to amplify their capabilities in terms of creating content at scale. But if you look at some of the ones that are focused on a specific market, like Rob brought up in his question, like manufacturing, you've got ARC Advisory, which is a sizable firm, not the size of Omdia, obviously, but still a good set of very smart, very capable analysts focused on manufacturing, supply chain, etc. You've got MGI, tiny boutique, but dominant in terms of their mind share in the monetization platform markets. Now, they could continue to grow, or like Duncan mentioned, M&A. They might decide that it would be better to be part of a larger organization. Now, when it comes to some of the verticals like manufacturing or healthcare or something like that, the new TechTarget already has significant number of events and content creators for those particular markets. So it would be very logical, just like being able to acquire ESG to add in to Omdia to create new intellectual property to feed into the machine. I could easily see the new TechTarget with its resources going after some of these specialty industry-specific firms to grow their content. But again, something to think about, which Duncan mentioned, was it's not just the content, it's not just the written word, it's the data and the analysts who can go up on stage, like Maxine Holt's team at Black Hat. And then at Black Hat, they do a Omdia Summit. Again, good synergy between different parts of the organization. So yeah, I see that there's always going to be a role for the boutique firms specifically focused on a niche where they can go deep, where perhaps the larger firms would spread the peanut butter too thin, to use a favorite metaphor of mine. But that could also mean that they could be targets for acquisitions if they are so interested in exiting.
And Carter, I think that this also reflects the shift in the way that vendors are going to market. Vendors are increasingly verticalized. The customer success kind of orientation in selling means that organizations need to show much more understanding. Organizations want to develop more customer advocacy. And I'm sure for the smart people on this call, their organizations have no problems like that. But with some of the organizations that I've come across, it's extremely hard for the organizations to develop compelling, market-aligned, vertical market stories. That's where analyst content can come in. So again, we're in a world where where analyst firms don't need to have an enterprise-oriented sales force in order to be able to have an influence on enterprise buying, because if they've got a vendor-centric model where vendors are commissioning or amplifying or cooperating with events, with content, with anything really, the analyst content becomes the compelling hook that the vendor sales force and vendor marketing teams use to garner the attention of the buyers, of people influencing the buyer, not only in enterprise IT but all the way through the enterprise. And then the ability of the analyst firms and their data services wrapper to be able to feed back insight about buyer intent, about what keywords are coming up. This provides something where both TechTarget and Omdia and Informa Tech have great capabilities.
Okay, on to Marshall Lager's, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, Marshall. Question, will the merger lead to a reduction in force or an expansion of it? Perhaps one followed by the other. Well, traditionally in acquisitions, they always talk about if there happen to be a public company acquiring another company, they say to Wall Street, yes, we'll rationalize the back office, HR, accounting, etc. But what they'll focus on keeping and expanding will be the analyst teams, will be the content creation teams. In addition, there will be an expansion in the new TechTargets technology team in order to leverage all of this great content using artificial intelligence, the various flavors of artificial intelligence, not just generative AI. So what this does is it says to the large firms, IDC and Foundry under IDG, Gartner's doing it, specialized firms like Nucleus Research are doing it, i.e. using generative AI to be able to surface and act as a super search engine. So that part of the company, the technology teams, will get additional investment, because what better way to leverage your M&A activity than to be able to really grab this content and incorporate it into a greater whole. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. It takes time. You need technologists, but you also need the analysts to feed content to the technologists. So I see this as, yes, unfortunately, there will be job losses in the back office in many cases, but in terms of the customer facing, I think there's just going to be, more investment in those sorts of resources.
Totally. Carter, we are coming up on the hour. Is there one last question that you are just determined that we should answer before we let people go?
Actually, Joel just put it right there. Give us a good way to end the session. So Joel asked, how significant is this really? Will the market realign? And what does this mean, re meaningful analyst influence and engagement? You want to start with this, and I'll throw in my 2 cents in a minute.
I mean, it's how significant is it? Completely depends on new TechTarget's ability to execute. It's hard to emulate this, and not every, and certainly if somebody wanted to emulate it, it probably wouldn't be an analyst firm. If you think about it, Bloomberg, I don't know, Bloomberg is maybe more likely to take this kind of intervention, make this kind of intervention into the tech buying process than an incumbent like Gartner or Forrester. But if you were the owner of an analyst firm like Forrester, I mean, come on, surely some people at Forrester must be getting frustrated. I mean, they're just working so hard, but they can't get any respect. They're really struggling to keep their traction in the market. Some synergy with a more data-driven, more content marketing aligned, more vendor success aligned model would surely allow them to benefit from the synergies that their content can produce. Now, I definitely want to emphasize this is not the only business model that's viable, but it is a really compelling one, because it makes analyst firms worth more than the revenue they can generate themselves with their own content.
And I'll follow up with the idea that in terms of the technology industry, what we all, obsess over, the technology for CRM, for ERP, for monetization, for manufacturing systems and such like this. This is not a significant realignment of the marketplace. All the big players will continue to execute. Gartner will still be the, $8 billion behemoth in the market to influence directly the technology buyers. But what this does is it provides more competition, which is good for us as analyst relations professionals, because life is really hard when you've got one dominant player. We need more players. We need Omdia to grow bigger and to have more direct as well as indirect influence on the buyers. We need IDC with IDC Insights to become more impactful with the buyers of technology. So I see this as, not a significant realignment, but as an opportunity in the marketplace for the analyst relations community to have more players to work with, both in terms of the earn and the learn side. And this will be just a great opportunity over the next few years for those of us who like to observe and look at the marketplace and say, what's going on here? So first off, thanks to everybody. Thanks to Duncan. I think this has been a lot of great questions. Feel free to reach out to us to get the slides, to get the replays and everything. And Duncan, your final thoughts.
Well, I think this was a fantastic discussion. There are more questions that were submitted than we can really deal with. So Carter and I will sit down and try to respond to everybody one by one. If you want a copy of the slides or a copy, or you want to know about the recording, drop me a line, dc@safecircle.com, and then we'll get that to you. But thank you so much. You've been a fantastic audience, and Carter, of course, you've been a wonderful person to be able to speak about this with. Thank you so much.
Yes, and don't shut down the webinar yet until you've captured the chat and the Q&A so that we can be able to go back to folks.
Totally. Luckily, they all get saved automatically in the Teams webinar tool, so that's an advantage for us. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to end the meeting now, and then we will be in touch soon. Thanks so much, Carter.
Sounds good. Enjoy your stay in Spain.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.